Good morning, art enthusiasts and students who have been learning with me and who have already been seeing the first video that I've published a few days ago. And today in this video, I'm bringing a solution for a certain kind of problems that you guys face, and that is precisely about pencil shading. Pencil shading, and sometimes when you're doing a realistic work, um, or semi-realistic work or hyper-realistic work, it doesn't really matter, but sometimes the work, even like you have the skill, the patience, the perfect materials, like you might be using like industry best Stedlers and high quality paper, branded papers, but still the artwork doesn't turn out good. Now, how is that possible if you have the skill and the patience and the practice? How does this happen? Actually, it happens because sometimes the pencils and the paper that you use to deliver a certain kind of artwork, they are not compatible with each other. They some paper are like very good for sketching, some paper are very good for shading. But if you are using a paper for shading and that paper is not meant for shading, you will not get the desired effect or the result. So in this video today, I'm just going to discuss a range of papers that I have in my studio and the tools that I use to make my own artworks. Sometimes I want to do a hyper-realistic work, or sometimes I want to do a semi-realistic work or just basic study work. So I select my paper accordingly, and that gives me a very vibrant result altogether. So let's see what are the papers that we have. So these are the papers that I normally have in my studio for my sketching activities and drawing purposes and my practice works. So I'll be taking each one of these samples and explain to you guys like what is the difference between each paper. So I'll start with something very random, very regular. So that is the paper that I use for random sketches. So this is the paper that I use for my random sketches. And this is a normal copier paper that you'll get in the market anytime you want. And this is an 80 GSM paper. Now this is a normal paper that people use for photocopying purpose and writing notes and everything. So this is pretty thin, right? So if I just do this, you can hear the sound of it. It's pretty thin paper. Now this is the first paper. It doesn't have a lot of grain. So two parameters that we'll be discussing is the thickness of the paper, that's number one, and number two is the grain on it. All right, so this one doesn't have a lot of grain on it, but at the same time it is not very thick paper. Well, you can say like it's an okayish sort of a paper to use for sketches and drawing. The next one that I'll be going for is 110 GSM paper with some grains, that is this one right here. So if I can just turn a page, you can understand like it has a certain kind of thickness in comparison to the previous one that I just showed you, and the color is a little faded. It's a little off-whitish in its flavor, and there is a coarse grain on it. All right, so this coarse grain is very premium to feel while you're working on. And this is one of the papers that I normally use for my drawing. And then next comes another paper, that is this one. This is a 130 GSM paper. It's a little thicker than this one, and though it is like a little thicker than this one, but still it does not have that much grain on it. It's much more smoother. These all papers are variants of ivory sheets. All right, so on ivory sheet, the drawing thing comes better. The shading also comes better. That's the reason why ivory sheet is like widely used for making these types of, drawing copies. And the next one is going to be this one. So this is the paper, which is another set of ivory sheet. It has more cleaner surface, not much grain on it. And this one is a 130 GSM paper. It is a little thicker. Sorry, I'm so sorry. This is not 130. This is a 160. Yeah, this is a 160 paper. This one is 110. and this one is like 130, 30, 160, 110. So after these things, I'll be just going over to another set, which I have not yet unboxed. It's a Brewster paper. It's a pastel paper. And as you can already see that it's written 160 GSM paper. So it's very, very close to this one. It's just white and these are like colored ones. But the grain on it is much, much bigger, and it has like coarse grains than this one. This one is more smooth and this one is not. I'm just gonna show it a little bit closer to the camera so that you guys can see. I don't know whether it's very visible or not, because it's really not visible that much. If I just put some color on it, it might just become visible. So I'll just show it a little bit a little while later. And next and lastly comes this paper. This is a 300 GSM paper. It's very thick. As you can see the thickness of it right now, right here on the camera. And can you hear the sound of it? It's quite different from the ones that we have already seen. So this is a 300 GSM paper. Now, what are these papers for, and which ones are the best ones to use your sketches and practice works and shading so that it comes out great? I'll say like this one is excellent for shading, but this one is good for realistic works, because the works that you can produce on this will have finer finish altogether. In comparison to this one or this one, like the 300 GSM one, it won't really come that great because of the coarse grain on it. Pencil won't really strike very smoothly and it will not have the impact. So I'll just take my pencil and show you how the gradation works on each paper so that you can understand. All right. I'll be using a Staedtler and a Sakura mechanical pencil, which is a 2B. And you already know that I'm a fan of using a 6B here and there. So I'll be taking a 6B as well to show you the impact of it, along with a 4B. All right. So here we go. So I've taken my 6B. I'll start with the 80 GSM paper. So right now I have started doing the stroke section on this one, and I'll give you a closer look. As you can see that there are like microscopic spaces in between my pencil strokes, but at the same time, if I keep on doing it, all the grains and the in-between spaces are getting dissolved, right? And it's giving me a smooth finish altogether. So if I happen to like make one end a little bit more heavier than the other end, let's see what happens. I'll just make this side a little bit more heavier so that I can show that it's a fade off. So the 2B pencil works pretty good and it's giving us a very, very smooth finish altogether, though it is one of the thinnest papers in my studio. But it looks really great when you're doing a realistic work, because in realistic work you will have to make sure that the entire shade gradation is very smooth and there are no like jerks here and there. So this is my 2B pencil. I'll take a 4B to see how it works out. So I'll just press a little bit more on the paper to get a darker shade out of it. So I can get a darker shade out of my pencil on top of my 80 GSM paper. It's quite convenient. I'll take the last one, which is a 6B, and try to get like even a harder stroke on my lower side, like the extreme darkest dark that you might need. So this is my darkest dark and it's sort of fading as it goes on to the right. So you can understand the shade gradation is not very grainy. If I just zoom out a bit, so here it is. As you can see that the smooth finish of the pencil the Staedtler pencil can be obtained here on this one, and it's pretty much decent on that part. So I'll just go over to the second paper. Oh, one more thing I wanted to discuss is the impact, the damage the pencil does on the paper. So for that, I'll just go for the reverse. As you can see that the paper is not damaged, right? There is an impression because the paper is very thin. So there's an impression on the back side and we can see through sort of, but there is no damage on the paper because it can take up a lot of pressure that way. So the next paper that I'm going to show you guys is a 130 GSM paper. That is this one. I'll again start with my 2B. So I've again taken my Sakura 2B and started in a similar fashion like the before one. Now each stroke is sort of getting blended very well, but my pencil is having a little bit of jerk because it's a little it's a little coarse than the paper that I used last. That's the 80 GSM copier paper, but still it's like smooth. I'm just gonna bring a little bit more heavyweight on this side. Still, it's pretty much smooth, a little bit more pressure. And I think I've already got my darkest tone from my 2B. I can't push it any longer. I'll take my 4B. As you can see that 4B can deliver a darker stroke than my 2B on this paper at least. It's working and it's quite smooth that way. Finally, the 6B, and see if we can get the darkest of the dark. And here we go. Now, if you can notice this one, and if I can take up my previous paper in which I had done the shading portion on the 80 GSM and compare these two. Now, you guys can conveniently tell which one looks more smooth, right? That's this one, not this one. This one we can work on, but this one, the shading is much more smooth and the strokes are sort of blended with each other. And this one, I can still see some strokes. Even if you work a little bit on it, the strokes will not be gone like completely. But in this one, if you work a little bit more with a nimble finger, these strokes will merge into one solid block of grading. All right. So these two papers we have already tried. Let's take up another. Now I'll be taking this one is a 110 GSM paper, and here we go. Now, as I already started, can you see that the lightest stroke somehow became more dark? It's not as light as I started in the previous two shading works. If I want to grow on the depth part on the right side, you'll see that my 2B is actually delivering a lot of graphite on this paper. And there is a certain kind of grain on this paper which is giving it a very coarse look altogether. Unlike the 130 GSM paper that I used just before this one, that one was giving me a lot of smoothness while I was shading it, but this one is not giving me a lot of smoothness. Even if I try to give a little lighter shade, you will also see that the grain is not missing, it's still there. Now 2B, as powerful as it can be, is capable of delivering a very high quality depth. So you can see that it's sort of giving me that thing. I'm just going to take my 4B, extend this right side and pushing the dark in. Now, already you can see that the dark to the medium tone, that's the dark side here and the medium tone here, It's a little smooth on the dark side, but the medium is showing grains of the paper coming through your shade. And finally, I'll take my 6B. And it has not made a lot of difference on it. Now this is the darkest dark that you will get in this type of paper. And this is the problem where we cannot get a very hyper-realistic artworks on this one. Be that any fruit object or a human portrait, we can't get a very smooth finish hyper-realistic work because of these grains. But these grains can be very, very beneficial when we are doing something like a still life or something. It's a certain kind of effect which is always there, and it has a nice feel to it, but this paper is not appropriate for any kind of hyper-realistic or realistic artworks. It might look painterly, it will look good, but it will not be a realistic one. Now comes the 160, one more time. This paper, I'll take up the 2B first. I started with the 2B. Now the color of the paper is sort of hampering my lightest tone, but we can get a smooth finish through though the grains are actually showing. It's not as smooth as the second one that we did. That was 130 GSM. Dark is coming out smoothly, as you can already see. Yes, a certain kind of realistic artworks can be obtained because the grains and the graphite deposited on the grains can be camouflaged a bit because of the color of the pastel paper. I'm just gonna take my 4B to extend this dark. And you can already understand, like, the 4B is delivering the most of the dark tone on it. Due to the reflection, it might look a little brownish, but trust me, it's a little black, gray rather. And the 6B does not do any big difference than the 4B that it already delivered. So yes, it's a sort of a failure if you are going to use a pastel paper to do a shaded work and you are expecting a hyper realistic work. It's not possible like that. It will have certain kind of grain. Yes, you can achieve a certain degree of realism in your artworks when you're using this paper, but it's not going to be as good as the 130 GSM smooth ivory sheet. All right. And finally, I have the worst of the lot. That is a 300 GSM paper, which is this one. As you can see through the video already, can you guys understand the grain on it? I think you can. So in this one, this paper is actually primarily used for watercolor paintings because it has a very very high GSM to it. It's 300 GSM, so you can understand it's quite thick that way. So in this one, we do the watercolors most and do not do any sketching. But at the same time, I will show you what is the effect of sketching or any type of shading that can happen. Now, even with my lightest stroke, can you understand that it's actually delivering a lot of graphite on the surface? It's not really bringing out my light middle tone or the light tone on my surface at all. I'll go for my middle tone, and that too is quite heavy. The lines are not really merging out. I'm just doing one more time. The grains are showing. What happens if I do the dark tone? Sort of merging, but not really, not enough. So I've taken my 4B, I'm pressing a little bit more. Grains showing through, as you can understand, this portion, right? And finally the 6B. 6B blocks out all the grains and thus make it a little smooth. But the gradation from dark to light, we cannot achieve it on this paper. So these are the main functions of these papers, and I'll give you a comparison of how the shading looks like in different paper in some other video which I'll be making in the next week. and let's compare these. So among all these things, I think the best output that was produced was by this paper, which was 130 GSM. This is the 130 GSM paper. And next to this one, I'll say my 80 GSM copier paper was extremely nice for realistic strokes to blend them together and make it work. And for sketching purpose and drawing purpose, I would recommend anything which is like 160 GSM or 110 GSM, which is like this one. This one is 110. So this one is good. This one is also good, which is an 160 smooth finish. This is 110 coarse finish. These two are extremely good for drawing human figures, object drawing, still lives, landscapes, sceneries, anything you talk about, you are good to draw in these two papers. So we have gone through a number of papers here using my Staedtler pencils, and I just showed you how the gradation looks like in these various kinds of papers. So the best quality for any type of realistic works, if you have nimble hands and you have the ability to mix the shades together and get a deviation from the dark to light evenly, if you want that, then the best paper to work on is a smooth finish ivory paper, 130 GSM. That's the best paper you'll get. So how do you find this? Basically, if you go to the shop and ask like, I need 130 GSM smooth ivory sheet, they will not even know what you're asking for. So the best thing is to go through a lot of paper qualities. Whenever you find paper, just rub your hand on, strike the paper a little bit. If you hear the sound, you'll know like whether it's thick or thin. Once you handle a lot of papers, you will get to know about this paper a little bit more, and at the same time you will have to experiment on each paper to find out like which is the best quality paper for the artwork that you're wanting to make. Just go for it, try to find out the paper, appropriate it, and then after knowing the paper quality and what kind of shading and strokes is possible without damaging the paper, without getting an impression on the other side of it, after that you can do great artworks. All right, let's see each other on the next video. Bye.